The sun had not yet risen over the Apache village when the elders gathered to pass judgment. The woman who stood before him had once been a daughter of the tribe, a woman of skill and spirit, but now she was something else, an outcast, a shame, a stain that had to be removed. Her name was Shenoa, and her crime was simple. She had refused to marry the man chosen for her, not out of defiance, but because her heart belonged to another, a man who had been killed in a raid, whose memory she refused to betray. The elders did not care for such reasons. In their eyes, a woman who would not marry had no place among them. The sentence was swift and absolute. She was banished. They stripped her of her clothing, leaving her only a thin shift that offered no protection against the cold desert night. They took her horse, her blankets, her food, her water. They left her with nothing but the clothes on her back and the memory of a love that had cost her everything. Then they turned their backs and walked away, and the desert swallowed her whole. Chenoa stood alone in the darkness, the wind already cutting through her thin shift, her feet bare on the cold ground. She looked out at the endless expanse of sand and rock in the sky, and for the first time in her life, she understood what it meant to have nothing, to be nothing. She walked through the night, her feet bleeding, her throat parched, her mind a blur of exhaustion and grief. She did not know where she was going. There was nowhere to go. The nearest white settlement was days away, and she would be dead before she reached it. The Apache camps to the south would not take her. Word of her banishment would have spread, and no one would risk the anger of the elders by offering her shelter. She was alone in a way that few people ever were, utterly, completely, without hope. As the first light of dawn crept across the desert, she found a rocky outcropping and collapsed against it, too tired to go on, too tired to care. She did not hear the horse approach. She did not hear the rider dismount or the soft footfalls as he crossed the rocky ground toward her. The first thing she knew was a shadow falling across her face, blocking the rising sun, and a voice speaking words she could barely understand through the fog of her exhaustion. "Easy now, easy. I'm not going to hurt you." She tried to lift her head, tried to see the face of the man who spoke, but her body would not obey. She felt strong hands lift her, felt the warmth of a blanket being wrapped around her shoulders, felt herself being lifted onto the back of a horse. Then there was nothing. When she opened her eyes again, she was lying on a cot in a small cabin. Sunlight streamed through a window, and somewhere nearby, a fire crackled. She tried to sit up, but the pain in her feet made her gasp, and she fell back against the pillow. A man appeared beside her, a white man with a weathered face and eyes the color of the desert sky after a storm. He was holding a cup of water, and he brought it to her lips with a gentleness she had not expected. "Drink slow," he said. "You've been out for 2 days. You need to get your strength back." She drank, and the water was the sweetest thing she had ever tasted. His name was Samuel Crow, and he was a rancher who had come to this corner of the desert to escape a life that had brought him nothing but grief. He had found her at the edge of his land, half dead and barely breathing, and he had brought her home because, as he told her, a man doesn't leave another person to die in the desert, no matter who they are. He did not ask her name, or why she was alone, or what had brought her to the edge of death. He simply fed her and gave her water, and tended to her feet, and waited for her to be strong enough to speak. And when she finally did, he listened. She told him everything about the man she had loved, about the elders who had chosen another for her, about the banishment that had stripped her of everything she had ever known. She told him without tears, because she had no tears left, and without hope, because hope was a luxury she could no longer afford. When she finished, Samuel sat in silence for a long time, his hands folded on the table, his eyes fixed on something outside the window. Then he said, "You can stay here, as long as you need. I've got room, and I could use the help around the place." He looked at her then, and his eyes were kind. "No one's going to banish you from here." The days that followed were strange, unfamiliar, like learning to live in a new world. Chenoa had never been in a white man's home, had never eaten white man's food, had never spoken English for more than a few words at a time. But Samuel was patient. He taught her the names of things: the stove, the well, the corral, and she taught him the Apache words for the same. And somehow, between the two languages, they built a way of communicating that required fewer words than either of them expected. She learned to cook his food, and he learned to eat hers. She learned to tend his garden, and he learned to watch the sky for the signs she had been taught since childhood. She healed slowly, her feet knitting back together, her strength returning day by day. And as she healed, she began to see the man she was living with in a different light. He was not like the white men she had heard stories about. He did not shout, did not demand, did not treat her as less than him. He worked beside her in the garden, ate beside her at the table, sat beside her in the evenings, and watched the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky. He asked nothing of her, expected nothing from her, and in the silence of those long desert nights, she found herself beginning to feel something she had not expected: safe. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set behind the mountains, Samuel asked her a question that had been sitting between them for weeks. "Do you want to go back?" he said, his voice careful, as if he were afraid of the answer. Chenoa looked at him, and for a moment, she did not understand what he was asking. Then she did, and something in her chest tightened. "There is nothing to go back to," she said. "They took everything: my home, my name, my future." She paused, and then, without meaning to, she added, "Accept what you have given me." Samuel looked at her for a long moment, and in his eyes she saw something she had not seen before. It was not pity. It was something else. The trouble came a week later. 3 riders appeared on the horizon, moving fast, their horses kicking up clouds of dust that rose like smoke against the sky. Samuel saw them first, and Chenoa saw his hand move to the rifle that always stood beside the door. "You know them?" he asked, his voice low. Chenoa squinted against the sun, and then her blood ran cold. She recognized the man in the lead. His name was Victor, and he was a trader who had long coveted the land Samuel's ranch sat on. He had tried to buy it, tried to bully Samuel into selling, and had been refused each time. Now he had come back, and he had brought friends. They reined in before the cabin, 3 men with hard faces and harder eyes. Victor dismounted first, his smile wide but his eyes cold. "Samuel," he said, his voice dripping with false friendliness. "Heard you've been keeping company with Apache these days. Folks are starting to talk." Samuel did not smile. "What do you want, Victor?" Victor's smile faltered, but he pressed on. "Word is, you've got a woman here, a banished woman. The tribe wants her back. Or so I hear." He looked at Chenoa, and there was something in his gaze that made her want to shrink away. "I'm here to offer you a deal. The woman goes with me, and I forget about that land. Fair trade, wouldn't you say?" Chenoa felt the world tilt beneath her. She had been banished, cast out, left to die, and now they wanted her back? She looked at Victor's face, at the cold calculation in his eyes, and she understood. They did not want her back. They wanted her silenced. A banished woman could be forgotten. A banished woman who had been saved by a white man was a scandal, a story that would spread, a challenge to the authority of the elders. They would rather see her dead than see her free. She opened her mouth to speak, but before she could, Samuel stepped forward. His voice, when it came, was low and hard as stone. "She's not going anywhere with you." Victor's smile vanished. "Samuel, I'm trying to be reasonable here. That woman is Apache. She belongs with her people. You're a rancher, not a guardian of lost souls. Give her to me, and we forget this ever happened." Samuel's hand closed around the rifle, and his eyes never left Victor's face. "She's not a thing to be traded. She's a person. A person who came to me half dead, who asked nothing from me but a place to heal. And now you come to my home and tell me I should hand her over to you. so you can do God knows what. He shook his head slowly. No. The answer is no. And if you don't turn your horses around right now, the answer will be the last thing you ever hear. For a long, terrible moment, no one moved. Victor's hand hovered near his pistol, and Chenoa could see the calculation running behind his eyes. 2 men behind him, 1 woman, 1 rancher. The odds were in his favor, but Samuel stood like a man who had nothing to lose, and there was something in his stance that made even Victor hesitate. Finally, Victor spat on the ground and turned back to his horse. "This isn't over," he said, mounting up. "You can't keep her forever. The tribe will come. They'll take her back, and when they do, your land goes with her." He rode away without looking back, and the other 2 followed, their dust settling slowly in the evening air. Chenoa stood on the porch, her heart pounding, her hands shaking. Samuel was beside her, his rifle still in his hands, his eyes fixed on the horizon where the riders had disappeared. "They will come back," she said. Her voice was steady, but only because she had spent her life learning to hide her fear. "He will bring others. He will not stop." Samuel lowered the rifle and looked at her, and in his eyes, she saw something that made her breath catch. It was not the anger she had expected, or the frustration of a man whose peace had been broken. It was determination. "Then we'll be ready," he said simply. "I didn't bring you back from the edge of death to let them take you now." That night, they sat by the fire in the cabin. The window shuttered, the door barred. Chenoa watched Samuel as he cleaned his rifle, his movements slow and deliberate, the way her father had cleaned his weapons before a hunt. She thought about the life she had left behind, the banishment that had stripped her of everything, the long walk through the desert that should have killed her. And she thought about this man, this stranger who had found her when she was nothing, who had given her back her life, who was now prepared to fight for her against men who could destroy him. "Why?" she asked, and the word came out softer than she intended. Samuel looked up from his rifle, and for a moment, he did not seem to understand the question. Then he set the rifle aside and turned to face her, his hands resting on his knees. "Why what?" he asked. "Why did you save me?" She said, "Why did you let me stay? Why are you risking everything for a woman you did not know, who had nothing to give you?" Samuel was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was low, as if he were speaking to himself as much as to her. "Because when I found you in the desert, I saw someone who had been thrown away, someone who had done nothing wrong except love the wrong person, refuse the wrong man. And I thought about all the people in my life who were thrown away, who deserved better and never got it. I couldn't let that happen to you." Chenoa looked at him, and in the firelight, she saw him clearly for the first time. She saw the loneliness in his eyes, the grief he carried for a past he did not speak of, the quiet courage of a man who had chosen to stand alone and was now choosing to stand with her. She reached out and took his hand, her fingers cold against his warm skin. "The elders said I would never marry," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "They said I had no place among them, but I have found a place here, with you." Samuel looked down at their joined hands, then up at her face, and something shifted in his expression, something that looked like hope. "Chenoa," he said, and her name in his voice was like a prayer. The weeks that followed were not easy. Victor did not return, but the threat of him hung over them like a storm cloud that never broke. Samuel taught Chenoa to shoot, and she taught him to track, and together they built a life that was stronger than any threat that could come against it. And when, one evening, a party of riders appeared on the horizon, not Victor, but the elders of her tribe, come to see for themselves the woman they had banished, Chenoa stood beside Samuel on the porch, her hand in his, and faced them without fear. She told them the truth, that she had been cast out, left to die, and that she had found a life worth living with a man who saw her as a person, not a possession. She told them she was not coming back. And when they left without a word, and she watched them go with a heart that was lighter than it had been in months. That night, Samuel built a fire in the hearth, and they sat together in the warmth of it. Two people who had been cast out by the worlds they came from, building a new world between them. "You saved me," Chenoa said, her head resting against his shoulder. Samuel shook his head slowly. "We saved each other." And in the silence that followed, surrounded by the desert and the stars and the quiet certainty of a love that had been forged in the harshest of fires, Chenoa knew that the banishment that was meant to be her end had become her beginning. She had lost everything, and in the losing, she had found something she had never dared to hope for: a home.